The year is 1872. Nestled deep in the rugged Sierra Nevada mountains, a new silver strike has drawn a swarm of hopeful prospectors to a nascent settlement optimistically dubbed Silver Creek. The air buzzes with the promise of wealth, but beneath the surface, an older, darker story whispers through the pines. This is the tale of the Blackwater Mine, a forgotten claim now suddenly yielding rich veins, and the ominous legends that surround its depths. Our protagonist is Martha "Marty" Hayes, a shrewd, independent woman in her late 30s, with eyes that have seen too much hardship but still hold a glint of determination. Marty isn't a miner, she's a seasoned assayer, capable of discerning rich or from worthless rock, a skill far more valuable than a pickaxe in a boomtown. She's come to Silver Creek with her younger brother, Caleb, a restless, ambitious man eager to make his fortune. The Blackwater Mine had been abandoned for decades, plagued by cave-ins and what old-timers called bad luck. Legend had it that the original claim, discovered by a family of ill-fated prospectors known as the McCrearys, was cursed. They all vanished or died mysteriously within months of striking silver, their wealth never seen. The mine filled with groundwater, earning its grim name, and was left untouched. However, a recent, unexpected seismic shift caused a natural drainage, emptying much of the water from Blackwater. Rumors of a massive, exposed silver vein quickly spread, drawing new attention, despite the lingering superstitions. Caleb, ever reckless, was among the first to stake a claim on a rich section of the mine. Marty, despite her pragmatic nature, felt an immediate sense of unease about Blackwater. The air around its damp, timbered entrance felt colder, heavier than any other mine she'd essayed. There was a faint, metallic tang in the air that wasn't just iron. But Caleb, blinded by silver fever, dismissed her concerns. Superstition, Marty. This is our chance. This is pure, virgin silver. He and his small crew began their work. At first, the returns were astounding. Caleb would bring back chunks of glittering ore, rich with pure silver, confirming the rumors. The town began to truly boom. But as the mining progressed deeper, strange things started to happen. The miners reported faint, disembodied whispers echoing through the wet tunnels, barely audible over the clang of picks. They spoke of seeing fleeting shadows darting just beyond the reach of their lanterns, too quick to identify. Tools would mysteriously vanish, only to reappear in impossible locations. The most unnerving phenomenon was a pervasive, cloying scent of damp earth and something vaguely floral, yet sickly sweet, that would suddenly fill certain sections of the mine, vanishing as quickly as it came. Caleb, though trying to remain jovial, started to look haggard. He spoke of vivid, disturbing dreams of figures moving in murky water, of hands reaching out from the darkness. He developed a persistent, hacking cough, a dry, rattling sound that worried Marty. One evening, as Marty was assaying a fresh batch of Caleb's ore, she noticed something peculiar. Embedded in a large chunk of silver was a tiny, intricately carved bone charm, no bigger than her thumb. It was smooth, dark, and felt unnaturally cold. It looked ancient, unlike anything a modern miner would carry. She showed it to Caleb, who stared at it, his eyes wide. I found a few of those," he stammered, "deeper in, near an old, collapsed shaft. I just thought they were Indian trinkets, lucky charms maybe." He didn't sound convinced. Just as he spoke, a sudden piercing scream ripped through the quiet night, echoing from the direction of the Blackwater Mine. It was followed by a panicked shouting and the frantic gallop of horses. Marty and Caleb rushed out, along with half the town. A miner, covered in grime and terror, burst from the darkness, his eyes wild. "The water! It's moving! And the voices, they're calling!" he shrieked, pointing back towards the mine. "They're in the water! The McCrearys! They want it back!" A chilling dread seized Marty. The promise of silver had brought them to Silver Creek, but the shadow of something ancient and vengeful had fallen upon the Blackwater mine. The McCrearys, and their cursed legacy, were far from forgotten. The true darkness of the sunken mine was beginning to reveal itself. The miners' panicked shriek about the McCrearys and the moving water sent a wave of icy fear through Silver Creek. Marty rushed towards the Blackwater mine with Caleb and the other townsfolk, their lanterns cutting weak paths through the pre-dawn gloom. What they found deepened the terror. The entrance to the main shaft of the Blackwater mine was indeed unsettling. The usually still pool of water at its base was agitated, churning subtly as if something unseen was moving beneath its surface. The faint scent of damp earth and sickly sweet florals was now overwhelmingly strong, clinging to the air like a shroud. And from within the dark maw of the mine, the disembodied whispers were no longer faint. They were a low, mournful chorus, like voices submerged underwater, calling out names, sometimes indistinct, sometimes terrifyingly clear. "They're calling the dead," an old, grizzled miner muttered, clutching a crucifix. "The spirits of the McCrearys. The mine won't let them rest." Caleb, though visibly shaken, tried to dismiss it. "It's just the water settling, the echoing of the tunnels. There's nothing here but silver." But his voice lacked conviction, and his gaze kept darting nervously towards the churning water. Marty, however, felt a colder, more primal dread. The bone charm she'd found in the ore, now clutched in her pocket, seemed to pulse with an unnatural chill. She knew this was more than superstition. The next few days saw an eerie lull, but the fear lingered. No one dared venture back into the deep shafts of Blackwater. Caleb, despite his brave talk, found excuses to stay away. The strange cough he had developed worsened, becoming a wheezing, persistent rattle in his chest. His dreams grew more vivid and disturbing, describing shadowy figures with distended limbs moving through murky water, their eyes glowing faintly, their voices beckoning him. Marty decided to seek out the oldest residents of Silver Creek, those who remembered the original McCreary tragedy. She found Silas Old Man Finch, a reclusive prospector who had been a boy when the McCrearys vanished. He was initially reluctant to speak, his eyes clouded with fear, but Marty's persistence, and her brother's worsening condition, eventually swayed him. Old Man Finch spoke of the McCreary family, not just as miners, but as men who dabbled in strange rituals. "They weren't just digging for silver, Martha," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "They were searching for something else. Something buried deep, beyond the silver veins. They talked about a living spring, a source of power that would make them unstoppable." He described how, shortly before their disappearance, the McCrearys had begun to change. They grew gaunt, their skin clammy, their eyes distant. They started to perform strange ceremonies near the mine entrance at night, muttering incantations, and leaving offerings of strange carved bones, just like the one Marty had found. "They tried to control it," Finch whispered. "The water, the spirits. But the spring, it claimed them. It pulled them down into the dark." Finch also spoke of the source of the curse, a powerful Native American shaman who had lived in the region long before the prospectors arrived. The shaman had warned the McCrearys not to disturb certain ancient sites, particularly a sacred underground spring believed to be a conduit to the spirit world. The McCrearys, driven by greed, ignored the warnings. The shaman, in retaliation, laid a powerful curse upon the mine and anyone who dared to disturb the spring, binding the spirits of those who died within it to guard its secrets. Marty felt a cold certainty settle over her. The bone charms, the water, the whispers, Caleb's dreams. It was all connected. The McCrearys hadn't simply vanished. They were trapped, their spirits bound to the very thing they had sought to control. And now, as Caleb and his men dug deeper, they were awakening something ancient and vengeful. The whispers beneath the water were not just echoes of the dead. They were the cursed voices of the McCrearys, and they wanted their treasure back, or perhaps they wanted company. Marty's conversation with Old Man Finch had revealed a terrifying truth. The Blackwater mine wasn't just cursed, it was a prison for the McCreary family's tormented spirits, bound by an ancient shaman's curse to guard a sacred underground spring. The bone charms Marty had found in Caleb's were not trinkets. They were central to this dark magic. Marty pulled the small, intricately carved bone charm from her pocket. It was smooth, almost polished, and felt unnaturally cold against her skin. She remembered Finch's words. They started to perform strange ceremonies near the mine entrance at night, muttering incantations, and leaving offerings of strange carved bones. She sought out Jedediah Jed Stone, the town's grizzled one-armed foreman, who had worked in dozens of mines. Jed was a man of few words but sharp observations. Marty showed him the bone charm and asked if he'd ever seen anything like it. Jed's one eye widened. "By the devil's beard. Where'd you get this, Marty?" His voice was raspy with surprise. "This ain't no Indian trinket. This is an old binding charm. My grandpa, he told tales of them. Used by some folks to tie spirits to a place, or to keep something hidden." "You find more of these, Caleb?" Caleb, who had overheard, shuffled uncomfortably. A few. Deeper in, near that old collapsed shaft where the water had pooled. We cleared a path around it." "Why? What do they mean?" His cough punctuated his words, a dry, rattling sound that had grown worse. Marty explained what Old Man Finch had told her about the shaman's curse and the McCrearys trying to control the spring. "These charms," she explained, "they're not offerings. They're what bound the McCrearys. They're like keys to their prison." A new, terrifying thought struck Marty. If the charms bound the spirits, then finding them meant that Caleb and his crew were not just disturbing the mine, they were inadvertently unraveling the ancient curse, weakening the very bindings that kept the McCreary's spirits contained. The rising water, the stronger whispers, the moving shadows. These were not just random hauntings. They were the McCreary spirits gaining strength, growing restless as their chains loosened. Caleb's condition continued to deteriorate. He grew weaker, paler, and his cough became almost constant, punctuated by fits of wheezing. He spoke of his dreams in more chilling detail. Not just shadowy figures, but actual faces in the murky water, their eyes glowing with an unholy light, their mouths moving in silent screams, beckoning him, calling his name. "They want me to join them, Marty," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They want me to bring them the silver. To finish what they started." Marty knew time was running out. Caleb was being consumed, body and soul, by the curse. She needed to understand how the binding charms worked, and more importantly, how to reverse or at least contain the curse. She returned to Old Man Finch, pressing him for more details about the shaman, the spring, and the ritual of the McCrearys. Finch, growing increasingly frail, spoke of the shaman's ultimate fear, that the sacred spring, if disturbed, could unleash something far more ancient and powerful than just the bound spirits. The spring, he rasped, is not just a source of water. It is a source of primal energy. The shaman bound the McCrearys to contain that power, not just punish them. If the binding breaks completely, the mountain will weep more than water. He described a chilling ritual that the shaman performed to lay the curse, involving not only the bone charms, but also sacred minerals from the earth and a specific sequence of offerings to appease the mountain spirits. The McCrearys, in their greed, had twisted this ritual, using it to try and harness the spring's power for themselves, inadvertently binding their own souls when the shaman's curse turned their ritual against them. Marty now had a horrifying task ahead. She needed to venture back into the Blackwater mine, deeper than anyone dared, to find the source of these charms and understand the true extent of the McCreary binding. She had to learn how to sever their hold on Caleb, and prevent the ancient power of the living spring from being unleashed. The silver had promised fortune, but now it demanded a terrifying price, threatening not just Caleb's life, but potentially the very fabric of Silver Creek itself. The cursed charms were not just relics. They were the tangible links to a desperate battle between greed and ancient magic, a battle Marty now had to fight. Armed with the unsettling knowledge of the binding charms and the shaman's curse, Marty knew she had to enter the Blackwater mine and delve deeper than any living soul had dared. The whispers from the mine had grown louder, more insistent, and Caleb's condition was deteriorating rapidly. He was weak, feverish, and plagued by waking nightmares of murky water and grasping hands. Jedediah Stone, despite his reluctance, agreed to accompany her to the mine entrance, but refused to go inside. "It ain't right, Marty," he rasped. "That place breathes evil." He gave her an old, heavy-duty lantern and a coil of strong rope. "Be careful, lass. Some things are best left buried." Marty entered the Blackwater mine alone, the flickering light of her lantern casting dancing shadows on the wet, timbered walls. The air was thick with the oppressive scent of damp earth and that sickly sweet, floral aroma that now made her stomach churn. The whispers were immediate, surrounding her, seeming to emanate from every crack and crevice. They were indistinct, but filled with a mournful longing, interspersed with what sounded like muffled screams. She followed Caleb's rough-hewn path, carefully observing the rock formations and the subtle shifts in the air. The deeper she went, the colder it became, a chilling dampness that seeped into her bones. The tunnels grew narrower, the timber supports groaning under the immense weight of the mountain. Marty kept her eyes peeled for the bone charms. She found a few more scattered on the ground, small, dark, and intricately carved, confirming Jed's words about them being binding charms. They seemed to lead her deeper, almost like a dark breadcrumb trail. She carefully collected them, though their unnatural coldness sent shivers down her spine. After what felt like hours, she reached the collapsed shaft Caleb had mentioned, the point where the water had once completely submerged the mine. It was a dark, yawning abyss, filled with stagnant, oily water that gleamed faintly in her lantern light. The scent was strongest here, almost suffocating, and the whispers, they were deafening, a cacophony of anguished voices rising from the murky depths. Marty peered into the shaft. The water was dark, opaque, but she could vaguely discern shifting shapes within it, distorted by the gloom. Her heart pounded. This was where the McCrearys had met their end, where their spirits were bound. Then, she noticed something peculiar about the water's surface. It wasn't completely still. There were subtle, rhythmic ripples, as if something was breathing beneath. And then, a faint light began to glow from the depths of the shaft, a pulsating, greenish luminescence that cast an eerie glow on the water. This had to be the living spring Old Man Finch spoke of, the source of the mountain's power. As the green light intensified, Marty saw them clearly. Spectral figures began to rise slowly from the depths of the water, translucent and distorted, their faces contorted in expressions of agony and fury. Their bodies were elongated, almost fluid, as if permanently altered by their watery grave. These were the McCrearies, their forms bound and twisted by the curse, emerging from their watery prison. Their whispers became clearer, more desperate, now forming coherent phrases, "Our silver, our blood." They took it. They stole the power, restore, return, release us. And then, chillingly, "Caleb, come, join us, become one with the spring, find the true wealth, the unending life." Marty felt an overwhelming wave of fear and revulsion. This wasn't just a haunting, it was a desperate plea from tormented souls, their misery turning to a twisted lure for her brother. The green light pulsed, drawing her in, threatening to pull her into the dark water. She felt an almost irresistible urge to step closer, to touch the shimmering surface. But then, another thought pierced through the fear. The shaman's warnings. These were not just victims. They were now active agents of the curse, their eternal torment twisting into a desire to drag others down. Marty realized she wasn't just investigating a haunting. She was battling a force that preyed on the living, seeking to expand its ranks. She had found the heart of the curse, the source of the terrifying whispers, and the true horror of the binding. Now, she had to find a way to sever it, before Caleb became just another spectral figure in the haunted depths of the Blackwater mine. Marty recoiled from the spectral figures rising from the Blackwater mine's watery depths, their pleas for release laced with a terrifying, desperate lure for Caleb. The pulsing green light from the living spring at the bottom of the shaft seemed to exert a powerful, almost hypnotic pull. Marty knew she had to find the source of the curse's strength and, more importantly, its weakness. Her only hope lay in understanding the shaman's legacy. She retreated from the immediate vicinity of the shaft, but stayed within the mine, huddling in a drier alcove. She pulled out the bone charms she'd collected, examining them closely in her lantern light. They were intricately carved, some depicting swirling water patterns, others what looked like primitive symbols of containment. They were clearly made with purpose, imbued with a powerful, ancient magic. Marty reasoned that if the shaman had placed the curse and used these charms, there must be a way to undo or at least mitigate its effects. She remembered Old Man Finch's words about the shaman's fear that the spring could unleash something far more ancient. This curse, then, was not merely punitive. It was a desperate act of containment. She decided to search for any signs of the shaman's original presence within the mine. She moved cautiously, following subtle changes in the rock, looking for unnatural markings or structures. The whispers of the McCrearies followed her, sometimes close, sometimes distant, a chorus of misery that clawed at her sanity. After what felt like an eternity, she stumbled upon a small, hidden chamber, tucked away behind a false rock wall near the deepest part of the existing shafts. It was a dry chamber, unlike the rest of the mine, and felt strangely warm. In its center, carved directly into the rock floor, was a large, elaborate circular symbol, glowing faintly with an internal luminescence similar to the spring, but a calmer, purer light. Around the symbol were smaller, intricate carvings that seemed to tell a story. Depictions of water, mountains, spirits, and human figures in postures of reverence and warning. This had to be a shamanic chamber, a sacred space. On a small, natural stone altar within the chamber, she found a collection of objects. There were several more bone charms, identical to the ones she'd found, along with bundles of dried herbs, polished river stones, and most importantly, an ancient, leather-bound scroll. The scroll was fragile, its edges crumbling, but the writing within was clear, etched with ancient precise symbols and what looked like a faded map. Marty carefully unrolled the scroll. It was not a language she understood, but the map was recognizable. It showed the layout of the mine, the location of the sacred spring, and a detailed depiction of the large circular symbol in the chamber. Surrounding the spring on the map were concentric rings, marked with the same bone charms and other, more complex symbols. This was the shaman's original ritual, the binding that had held the spring's power in check. Beneath the map, there were sequences of symbols that looked like incantations or instructions. One sequence of symbols seemed to be an unbinding ritual, with diagrams showing how to use the charms in reverse, and how to combine them with certain elements: earth, pure water, and sound. The final element was crucial: specific tones or chants that could either seal or break the bindings. Marty realized the chilling irony. The McCrearys had discovered this chamber, or parts of it, and tried to twist the shaman's power for their own gain. They had likely tried to replicate the binding, but corrupted it, leading to their own entrapment. They had disturbed the balance, and now their spirits were caught in the very magic they sought to wield. As she absorbed this knowledge, a sudden violent rumble shook the mine. Dust and small rocks rained down from the ceiling. From the main shaft, the McCreary whispers intensified, now mixed with a frantic, desperate wailing. The green light from the spring flared, casting grotesque shadows throughout the mine. The curse was growing stronger, reacting to her presence in the shaman's chamber. Or perhaps, Caleb was succumbing completely. Marty knew she had found the key to the curse, the shaman's legacy. But the process seemed complex, dangerous, and required not only the charms but a precise understanding of the ritual. She had to act quickly, before the mine consumed Caleb and unleashed the ancient power of the spring, threatening to bind not just individual souls, but potentially to draw all of Silver Creek into its terrifying depths. The burden of breaking the curse now rested entirely on her shoulders. Marty emerged from the Blackwater mine, shaken but armed with the shaman's scroll and the collected bone charms. The air outside felt thin and sweet after the oppressive gloom of the tunnels. She rushed back to Caleb, whose condition had worsened dramatically. He was now mostly delirious, muttering incoherently about silver and water, his body racked by a violent cough. His skin had taken on a pale, almost translucent sheen, and his eyes, when they occasionally opened, held the same chilling, distant glow she had seen in the spectral McCrearys. Marty laid out her findings to Old Man Finch and Jedediah Stone. Finch, his ancient eyes widening at the sight of the scroll, confirmed her fears. "This is it, Martha," he rasped, tracing the symbols with a trembling finger. "The shaman's own hand. The binding. The power of the spring. It twists greed into a hunger for souls." Jed, ever the pragmatist, was skeptical but saw Caleb's rapid decline. "So, you think this mumbo-jumbo can cure him? Or stop whatever's comin'?" "It's not about curing him, Jed," Marty explained, her voice firm. "It's about severing the binding. The McCrearys are trapped, and Caleb is being pulled into that same trap. The shaman bound them not just for punishment, but to contain a greater power within the spring. If we don't fix this, the entire town could be next. She pointed to the symbols for the unbinding ritual. We need to follow this. It requires these charms: pure water, earth, and specific sounds. The mention of sounds puzzled them. Sounds? Jed questioned. The scroll describes specific tones or chants, Marty explained. What the shaman called the voice of harmony or resonant echo. It seems crucial for sealing or breaking the magic. The McCrearys, in their greed, probably tried to replicate it, but warped it, binding themselves instead. Marty knew the greatest challenge would be getting Caleb to cooperate, or at least, to remain still long enough to perform the ritual. He was deeply under the spring's influence, lured by its ancient power and the false promise of unending life whispered by the McCrearys. As evening approached, a thick, unnatural fog began to roll into Silver Creek from the direction of the mine. It was cold and damp, carrying that familiar, sickly sweet floral scent. And within the fog, everyone could hear it now, a chorus of mournful wailing and desperate whispers, the collective agony of the McCreary spirits. They were growing bolder, their influence spreading beyond the mine. Caleb, in his feverish state, thrashed in bed. The silver, the light. It calls to me, Marty. Join them. The spring will make us kings. He choked out, his eyes wide and vacant. He began to try and rise, drawn towards the windows, towards the source of the whispers. Marty, with the help of Jed and a few brave townsfolk, managed to restrain him. They decided the ritual had to be performed as close to the mine as possible, preferably at its entrance, where the veil between worlds was thinnest. They needed the raw earth, the pure water from the creek, and the collected bone charms. But as they prepared, an even more disturbing phenomenon began. Small puddles of dark, murky water began to appear spontaneously inside buildings, even on dry ground. And from these puddles, the faint green glow of the spring pulsed, and distorted, spectral hands seemed to reach out, beckoning, grasping. The curse was manifesting directly in the town, not just within the mine. Marty realized the full extent of the danger. The McCrearys were breaking free, their influence permeating Silver Creek. The living spring wasn't just a physical location. It was a nexus of spiritual energy, and the McCrearys, as its bound guardians, were now extending its corrupting reach. The lure of the spring was not just for silver, it was for souls. Marty held the shaman's scroll tightly. The solution was in her hands, but executing it amidst the rising tide of supernatural horror would be her greatest challenge yet. The eerie fog, the ubiquitous whispers, and the spontaneous pools of glowing, murky water reaching out with spectral hands. Silver Creek was no longer just a boomtown, it was a crucible of dread. Caleb was succumbing rapidly, his life force draining away, pulled inexorably towards the cursed Blackwater mine. Marty knew the unbinding ritual from the shaman's scroll was their only hope. Under the cover of the unsettling fog, Marty, Jedediah Stone, and a few courageous townsfolk, including Old Man Finch, gathered at the mouth of the Blackwater mine. The air here was thick with the scent of decay and the maddening chorus of the McCreary whispers. The pool of water at the shaft's base churned violently, a pulsating green light emanating from its depths, illuminating the spectral figures within. Now clearer, more aggressive, their faces twisted in grotesque anticipation. Caleb, semi-conscious and feverish, was laid carefully on a canvas sheet near the mine entrance. His body shuddered uncontrollably, and he still mumbled about the silver and the light. Marty took charge, her face grim but resolute. "Jed, you're strong. I need you to hold Caleb steady, no matter what happens. Finch, your knowledge of the old ways is crucial. Listen for the tones." She then instructed them on the layout of the ritual circle, using chalk to draw the ancient shamanic symbols she'd copied from the scroll around the mine entrance. She placed the pure creek water in a shallow basin at one point of the circle, the earth from the mountain at another. Then, one by one, she began to place the bone charms at specific points around the circle, as depicted in the scroll. As each charm touched the ground, a wave of palpable coldness emanated from it, and the whispers from the mine intensified, changing from mournful to furious, as if the McCrearys sensed their bonds being threatened. When the last charm was placed, the green light from the spring pulsed violently, and the spectral figures of the McCrearys surged forward from the water, their elongated, distorted arms reaching through the veil, trying to grasp Caleb. Jed fought to hold Caleb down, who thrashed and screamed, his eyes rolling back as if battling unseen forces. Marty knew the critical part of the ritual was next, the resonant tones. She began to chant, her voice clear and steady despite the chaos, mimicking the melodic pattern she had deciphered from the scroll. It was a strange, haunting tune, a series of elongated vowels and resonant hums, unlike any song she had ever heard. As her voice filled the night, an extraordinary phenomenon occurred. The air around the mine entrance began to vibrate, and the green light from the spring flickered erratically. The furious wails of the McCrearys seemed to be torn, distorted by the resonant sounds of Marty's chant. The spectral figures convulsed, as if in agony, their attempts to cross the threshold momentarily halted. But the McCrearys were not easily defeated. Their spectral forms began to solidify, pushing against the invisible barrier of the ritual. The whispers turned to guttural snarls, demanding release, cursing Marty. One particularly large, shadowy figure, likely the patriarch of the McCreary family, lunged forward, its form momentarily solidifying, its glowing eyes fixed on Caleb. Marty faltered for a moment, the sheer force of their malevolence threatening to overwhelm her. Caleb let out a horrifying gurgle, a dark, viscous fluid bubbling at his lips. He was fading. Old Man Finch, his eyes wide with fear but his voice steady, quickly stepped forward. He began to hum, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to synchronize with Marty's chant, adding a powerful, ancient resonance. It was an old Native American healing chant, he later admitted, one his grandmother had taught him. The combined sounds created a powerful, undulating force that pushed back against the spectral surge. The energy flared. The bone charms pulsed, some glowing faintly, others cracking under the strain. The mine trembled, and a low, guttural roar echoed from its depths. Not the McCrearys, but something deeper, older, an ancient fury awakened from the living spring. Marty knew this was the moment of truth. She pushed every ounce of her will into the chant, focusing on the intention, to sever the binding, to release Caleb, and to contain the spring's power once more. The ritual was unraveling the curse, but it was also a dangerous dance with ancient forces, threatening to either save Caleb or condemn them all. The mine throbbed, a living entity writhing in agony as Marty and Old Man Finch sustained their ancient chant. The combined power of their voices resonated through the very earth, battling against the furious onslaught of the McCreary spirits. The spectral figures, though still reaching, were recoiling, their wails of fury twisting into shrieks of pain as the unbinding ritual took hold. Caleb continued to convulse, his body twitching as if an invisible force was being ripped from him. The murky, glowing puddles in Silver Creek flickered and began to recede, as the curse's reach slowly retracted towards its source. Marty felt the immense strain, the psychic pressure of battling so many tormented souls. Her throat was raw, her head pounding, but she focused on the scroll, on the sequence of the charms, and the purity of her intent. Jedediah Stone, grim-faced, held Caleb firmly, occasionally casting nervous glances at the struggling spectral forms. Then, Marty reached the final phase of the ritual. The scroll indicated a specific action to accompany the final, elongated tone. She had to crush the bone charms in a precise order, releasing their binding energy back into the earth, thus severing the McCreary's tether to the spring. With a deep breath, she picked up the first charm. As she did, the spectral patriarch of the McCrearys lunged forward with a final, desperate surge, its face contorted in a silent scream of pure malice. Marty flinched but crushed the charm in her hand with a sickening crack. A burst of icy cold energy erupted, and the patriarch's spectral form recoiled, shrieking, and then, with a horrifying gurgle, it seemed to dissolve back into the murky water of the shaft. She moved quickly, crushing the other charms one by one. Each snap of bone met with a violent reaction from the mine. With each charm broken, another segment of the McCreary chorus faded, and a spectral figure dissolved back into the depths. The air grew slightly lighter, the oppressive scent beginning to dissipate. Finally, only one charm remained, the very first one Marty had found in Caleb's ore. She held it, its coldness now almost unbearable, vibrating with a dark energy. As she looked towards the mine shaft, she saw only faint, lingering traces of the McCrearys, their forms almost transparent, fading. The green glow from the spring was dimming, retracting back into the deepest abyss. She crushed the last charm. A final piercing shriek ripped from the mine, not a chorus, but a single agonizing cry that echoed through the mountains, then faded into silence. The green light from the spring vanished completely, plunging the mine shaft into absolute darkness. Suddenly, the eerie silence was broken only by Caleb's ragged breathing. His thrashing stopped. His body went limp. Jed gingerly released him. Marty knelt beside her brother, her heart pounding. His skin was still pale, but the unnatural translucence was gone. His cough was still present, but less violent. He was no longer feverish, and his breathing, though shallow, was regular. The glow in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, exhausted sleep. The binding was severed. The townsfolk, who had watched in hushed terror, now cautiously approached. The oppressive fog over Silver Creek began to thin, revealing the stars overhead. The spontaneous puddles of murky water vanished, leaving only damp patches on the ground. The threat was receding. Marty felt an immense wave of relief, followed by an equally immense exhaustion. She had succeeded. The McCrearys were gone, their spirits finally released, or, perhaps, truly contained within the spring's depths, their malevolent power finally neutralized. The Blackwater mine now stood silent, its entrance dark and uninviting, but without the former dread. The silver was still there, the promise of wealth still glimmering, but everyone in Silver Creek now knew the terrible price it had almost exacted. Marty had faced down an ancient curse, battled tormented souls, and pulled her brother back from the brink of an eternal watery prison. But the experience had changed her forever. leaving an indelible mark on her soul. The curse had been severed, but its shadow would forever linger over the Blackwater mine and the collective memory of Silver Creek. The unbinding ritual was a success. Caleb slowly recovered, a shell of his former self, but alive. The fever broke, his skin regained its normal hue, and the unholy glow in his eyes faded. Yet, the ordeal had left its mark. He was severely weakened, plagued by a persistent rattling cough that would follow him for the rest of his days, a grim souvenir of his brush with the curse. More profoundly, Caleb was changed. The boundless ambition that had once driven him was replaced by a deep-seated fear and a quiet solemnity. He never spoke of the mine, never went near its entrance, and abandoned his pursuit of silver entirely. Marty, too, carried the scars of her encounter. While she was physically unharmed, the sheer force of the spiritual battle, the desperate pleas and furious snarls of the McCrearys, were etched into her memory. She would sometimes wake in the dead of night, hearing faint, phantom whispers, or smelling the sickly sweet scent of damp earth and florals. The bone charms she had crushed were gone, turned to dust, but the chilling knowledge of what they represented, and the primal power she had briefly wielded, stayed with her. The Blackwater mine became an even greater object of dread and avoidance. No one dared to venture back into its depths. The green light from the spring never returned, and the water at its entrance remained still and dark. The whispers ceased, replaced by a profound, almost unnatural silence. The vast silver vein within its heart was left untouched, a tempting, glittering monument to the unspeakable horror it contained. Silver Creek, having witnessed the terrifying manifestation of the curse, transformed. The frenetic boomtown energy subsided. Many prospectors, shaken by the events, abandoned their claims and left, seeking fortunes in less haunted lands. Those who remained were sobered, living with a newfound respect for the mountain's ancient secrets. The legend of the Blackwater mine, and the McCreary family's doomed greed, became a chilling cautionary tale passed down through generations. It was a stark reminder that some treasures are not meant to be disturbed, and some prices are too terrible to pay. Old Man Finch, having expended much of his remaining energy in assisting Marty, passed away peacefully a few months after the ritual. His last words to Marty were a warning. "The spring is quiet now, Martha, but ancient powers merely sleep. The mountain remembers. Always remember the balance." The shaman's scroll, meticulously copied by Marty, became a sacred, guarded artifact. Marty never spoke of its full contents, or the precise details of the ritual, fearing that such knowledge, if misused, could reawaken the curse. She understood now that the shaman had not just punished the McCrearys, but had performed an act of immense power to contain something far greater, something that lay coiled within the living spring. Marty chose to remain in Silver Creek, dedicating her life not to assaying, but to understanding the natural rhythms of the mountain, learning about the local flora and fauna, and sometimes visiting the quiet, somber grave of Old Man Finch. She became a protector of sorts, a silent guardian of the knowledge that lay beneath the earth, ensuring that the Blackwater mine's secrets remained undisturbed. The town itself never fully recovered its booming prosperity, but it found a quieter, more resilient identity. It became a place where people lived with an unspoken understanding of the veil between worlds, a place where the lingering shadow of the cursed mine served as a permanent reminder of the power of ancient legends and the terrifying consequences of greed. The McCrearys were gone, but their tragedy, and the legacy of the Blackwater mine, would forever whisper through the pines of Silver Creek. Decades turned into a century. Silver Creek, no longer a bustling mining town, dwindled into a quiet, forgotten mountain settlement. The Blackwater mine remained, its timbered entrance slowly decaying, overgrown with moss and tangled vines. The stories of the McCrearys and the curse, once vivid and terrifying, softened into folklore, whispered by grandmothers to wide-eyed children around flickering hearths. Yet, the mine retained its ominous reputation. No one ever dared to reopen it. Marty Hayes lived a long life, becoming a revered, if somewhat mysterious, figure in the community. She was known for her quiet wisdom, her deep connection to the mountains, and her uncanny ability to read the signs of the wild. She never fully recovered her emotional vibrancy, the part of her spirit lost to the curse, but she found a different kind of peace, a stoic acceptance of the world's hidden depths. Before she died, she passed on the copied shaman scroll, along with her own meticulous notes, to a trusted, equally solitary descendant, reiterating the solemn warning, "Never disturb the heart of the mountain. Some things must remain veiled." Even today, the Blackwater mine stands as a silent sentinel in the Sierra Nevada. Hikers and adventurers occasionally stumble upon its overgrown entrance, drawn by curiosity or the faint echoes of old maps. They might feel an inexplicable chill, a sense of profound stillness that permeates the air around it. Some report hearing what sounds like faint, distant water dripping, even on dry days, or catching a fleeting whiff of that sickly sweet floral scent carried on a gust of wind. Modern geological surveys have occasionally noted unusual seismic activity deep beneath the mine, inexplicable tremors that seem to emanate from a specific point far below the Earth's surface. Geologists dismiss them as natural phenomena, but some old-timers in the nearest towns still whisper about the mountain breathing. The true nature of the living spring within the Blackwater mine remains a mystery. Was it merely a source of ancient water? Or, as the shaman's legacy implied, a nexus of primal energy, a conduit to something unfathomable? The curse had bound the McCrearys, but perhaps it also contained this deeper, more potent force, protecting the world from its untamed power. The legend of the curse of the Sunken mine serves as a timeless cautionary tale. It is a grim reminder of unchecked greed, of the hubris of man disturbing ancient powers, and the terrifying price paid when the balance of nature and spirit is disrupted. The McCrearys, obsessed with silver, found a far darker treasure: eternal damnation within the mine's watery depths. Marty Hayes, in her courageous act, sealed the immediate threat, but she could not erase the mountain's memory. So, the Blackwater mine slumbers, a dark and silent monument to a terrifying past. Its depths remain veiled, guarding secrets that few would ever dare to uncover. And though the whispers of the McCrearys are gone, the chilling legacy of the Sunken mine lingers, an unending echo of warning carried on the wind through the Sierra Nevada, reminding all who listen that some things are best left undisturbed, forever bound beneath the earth.